welcome everybody. Welcome to At Home with Theosophy. This is our the last class in this series.
And we are coming live today from Wheaton instead of California, where here there is chilly air but very warm hearts. So we're really glad to be here.
Yes. So tonight we are going to see the last section in this book, Foundations of Esoteric Philosophy, which deals with the second volume of the Secret Doctrine. As we saw, the first volume is about the cosmogenesis, the manifestation and evolution of the cosmos. And this second volume is about anthropogenesis, which is the manifestation and evolution of humanity.
So she calls this the three new propositions that are from, like Pablo said, the beginning of anthropogenesis. And I could just say it here. There were, cosmogenesis was written once by Madame Blavatsky, and that kind of was it. Anthropogenesis, the Mahatmas made 3 attempts at it. The first one was man, fragments of
Forgotten
truths. That was Laura Holloway and Mohini Chatterjee. And then the second attempt is right here, Anthropogenesis by H.P.B. And then the third attempt was Man, Whence, How, and Whither by Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater. So there's a lot of studies on cosmogenesis, and anthropogenesis doesn't seem to get as much time. And there's a lot of vagueness in anthropogenesis that aren't answered clearly.
Yes,
in a relative sense.
Yes, it seems that when trying to explain the evolution of humanity, it's more complicated because, with the cosmos we can talk in more general terms and it sounds okay, but when we come to the history of humanity, we normally want more details, and also we have more information from science and how does this match or not what science says. And it's not easy to explain the evolution of humanity from an esoteric point of view. So as Michele said, there were several attempts, and they are they are similar in their general features, but there are different details, different emphasis on where the authors or developed, more the different processes that humanity went through.
Right. So in general, if we take a look at this and take a look at it in a general sense, not specifics. I know I can tell the honeymoon period is over with Pablo and I, because I used to ask for those specifics. Give me an example. How many years, or what's this, or what does that look like? And he used to make an attempt to answer me. Now I can just see him before I even get the question out, kind of shaking his head going, no, it's not possible. So that's one thing in doing this class that I learned, was to take it from a more general standpoint without speculation of what this body and this mind can put into it.
So the 3 new propositions are like the 3 fundamental propositions in cosmogenesis. Now there are 3 propositions for anthropogenesis. But first we have a note.
Right, note from Ianthe Hoskins. The first volume of the Secret Doctrine has as its subject matter the becoming of the cosmos, cosmogenesis. The second volume is concerned with the becoming of man, anthropogenesis. Its first section, like that of the preceding volume, is based on stanzas, drawn from the same archaic records as the stanzas on cosmogony. The preliminary notes serve as an introduction to the further stanzas and commentaries.
So these preliminary notes before the stanzas are like the proem in the first volume that had the 3 fundamental propositions. These preliminary notes have these 3 new propositions.
As regards the evolution of mankind, the Secret Doctrine postulates 3 new propositions, which stand in direct antagonism to modern science as well as current religious dogmas. And then it teaches. And we will see, even in this short presentation here, we'll see how antagonistic it is to modern science and where it doesn't fit into religious views. Okay, so A, the first one is the simultaneous evolution of 7 human groups on 7 different portions of our globe. From the stanzas of Xian, number 13 says, they, the moon gods, went, each on his allotted land, 7 of them, each on his lot. And 39 says, the first race on every zone was moon-colored. So first of all, we're going to talk about, as we go on, root races and sub-races. And it really needs kind of a little disclaimer because of how those words are charged today. So usually in general talks that aren't for members of the Theosophical Society or people who have studied this, we usually use evolutionary stage just to kind of get off that stickiness and get, to the heart of the matter. So that's the first thing that I wanted to mention as we go on. But then here in number 13, she says the moon gods. We talked about the lunar Petries last class, I believe it was. So that's who the moon gods are. So these lunar Petries, these 7 different groups of lunar Petries, started the evolution on 7 different places. Unlike the way science says that, there was a common source, one source, and I believe when I was in biology it was Lucy in Africa, and that's where all of humanity started. And so this is contradictory to that.
Yes, what Michele was saying, that we will see the idea of root races. There are 7 root races. We are in the 5th root race, and those are all evolutionary cycles, not ethnicities. And we will see a little more the quotes that we have about these moon gods. Remember that last time we talked about these hierarchies of celestial beings that are in charge of or are helping with the evolution of the universe. Well, as we are going to see, there are celestial beings that are related to the evolution of humanity. One of them are these moon gods or lunar Petries. Petries come from the Sanskrit. It means fathers or ancestors. And the first idea that Blavatsky brings here is that humanity started at the same time in 7 different places in the world. As Michele was mentioning, it's not the idea that it came all out of Africa or whatever next, science discovers.
Right, and part of what we have to remember too when we remember that when we talk about physicality, it's not physical as we know it. The different lands that they're talking about here are not the continents or the land masses that we know today. Mm-hmm.
So it says there that it comes from the idea of the myth of Adam and Eve, and science also takes that idea of everything coming from one source. There is an intrinsic problem with the idea that everything comes from one source at the genetic level. There is endogamy, you say in English, that these when there are populations that are very small and they reproduce within themselves, then certain mutations in the DNA begin to express, and this is an intrinsic problem when a population is too small or comes from a few individuals. So I think the idea of humanity starting in different groups, probably with different genetic compositions, makes more sense to generate the diversity and variability that is necessary for a species to grow.
Okay, did you want to say anything about the first race? The first race, so we're talking about, and we'll see it a little later, the first root race, which were definitely not physical by anything that we know as physical.
Yeah, we'll see a little more about that.
Strictly speaking, esoteric philosophy teaches a modified polygenesis, for while it assigns to humanity a oneness of origin insofar that its forefathers or creators were all divine beings, though of different classes or degrees of perfection in their hierarchy, men were nevertheless born on 7 different centers of the continent of that period, though all of one common origin, yet for reasons given their potentialities and mental capabilities, outward or physical forms and future characteristics were very different. So this has a lot to it. Let's touch first on the different classes or degrees of perfection. So the monads that animated these 7 different places, groups places,
of forms,
came from different places themselves in their evolutionary stage. So you might have had those monads that just came out of the animal kingdom. So they were animated. The forms that they were animated were more animalistic than more spiritual. And we've talked about this in past classes before too, about the hierarchy even within the beings that are on at any one stage. Then you have those monads that came from human beings that were from another planetary chain that kind of came here as the teachers of the
new humanity.
Teachers for the new humanity.
And then you have there are basically 7 classes of monads, all on different evolutionary stages when human evolution begins on Earth. And this is important to keep in mind because this, when we see, Blavatsky says this is what explains the differences in capacities in people, in human beings. It's not because God chooses some to be better than others. It's not out of random, genetic variations as it is thought in science. It's not because some souls are better than others and evolved faster, so these are winning the race. We started from the very beginning with monads of different ages. So there were some that were already adults, spiritually speaking, and some that were baby monads. And they needed different kinds of bodies or forms. So this is a reason why different Petries, the more evolved Petries, they were able to build more perfected bodies. The less evolved Petries, they were able to build less, spiritual bodies.
Or the newer Petries.
The newer. There is remember that we said last week that the creative forces themselves are evolving. So the Petries who are providing with the bodies for humanity, and we will see how, they themselves are in a process of evolution. So that's something that is important to keep in mind as we look at the world and see how come there are people who are still at a stage where they try to solve things through violence, even physical violence, while other people are saints. But it's part of the differences in the evolution of the monads.
And this, to me, I can see where this is a great practice, just very superficially, in letting go of or noticing that how our mind compares and judges and categorizes things. Right here, we do it all the time, that I'm more spiritual or I'm spiritually advanced or something like that. And that just comes up. And as long as we watch that and know and understand these types of teachings, then we can start to just let that go and that as a side, and then hopefully touch more of the higher aspects of our thinking processes and see more of the less of the categories.
Mm-hmm. So just to finish with this slide, Blavatsky says the whole of humanity came through these celestial beings, but the celestial beings themselves were of different evolutionary stages that were matched by the different evolutionary stages of the monads, the human monads that had to incarnate in the forms. Now remember, as Michele said, we are still at the level, as we are going to see, of ethereal or astral forms, not physical. We don't have DNA or anything like that at this point. But from these 7 groups, we'll develop these 7 groups of humanity that eventually they begin to mix, to intermix. And they may be connected with the 7 rays, as it says there. There may be, probably within each of these groups, there are 7 subdivisions responding to the different rays. But basically, I think what is important at this point is to understand, so that we understand the differences in humanity, is to understand that we have monads from different ages, allegorically speaking, starting the evolution in humanity.
Okay, the second new proposition, the birth of the astral before the physical body, the former being a model for the latter. From the stanzas of Xian, number 12, bring forth men, the lords of the moon were told, men of your nature, give them their forms within. She, Mother Earth or Nature, will build coverings without external bodies.
Will build coverings without, which are the external bodies.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Here again, Lords of the Moons are the lunar Petries, and then bring forth men of your nature. So that tells us right there that the lunar Petries were more ethereal in their composition.
Yeah, it says give them their forms within. What Blavatsky explains is that these Petries were ethereal, and they emanated from their own substance like an ethereal body or an astral body that served as the model for what will become eventually a physical body. So the Petries emanated this ethereal or astral kind of model, and then in the next 3.5 cycles, little by little, nature begins to, allegorically speaking, cover it with matter, so that eventually we have a physical body that is following the model that the Petries gave. And you see that it says, bring forth men out of your own nature. In a similar sense, when a mother has a baby, the baby comes out of the nature of the mother. So the Petries are like our mothers in that sense. They provide the form for the monads to incarnate. Now at this point, we have only the monads and these empty forms. There is no soul really there. There is no intelligence, as we are going to see.
And so, these forms are androgynous. They're not male or female. And I was going to say one other thing.
Yeah, they are more like a
pudding sack.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I don't know where that name came from. Was it Carl Sagan?
No, the Secret Doctrine talks about.
I took a class not by Carl Sagan, but videos of him, and he talked about these, and they looked kind of like pudding sacks, but these balloons almost that were floating. And I always think of that when I read this part, that he was very in tune to that.
With what Blavatsky was saying there.
The Dhyanis, lunar Petries, evolved their doubles from themselves, which rupa, or form, has become the vehicle of human monads. Then they, the astral doubles, became the men of the first human race of the round, but they were not complete and were senseless. So first I want to touch on the Dhyanis, the lunar Petries. This is what we talked about last class when we talked about the collectivity or the aggregate of the demiurgos. And so that's just this is what we were talking about last week in this form. So the Dhyanis or the Dhyan Chohans, the celestial beings, the lunar Petries, the collective demiurgos is what this is.
And this is what we were talking about that these astral doubles become the forms of humanity. Now Rosie asked, did you say pudding sack?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say.
Yes, yes. The idea is it was a formless aura, let's say, ethereal aura. This is like the fetus of humanity. This is not we are humanity. There is no intelligence here, as Blavatsky says. We're senseless. This is just the work of preparation to create a physical body that can become the temple of the spirit, in a sense. A physical body that can um, generate or be the vehicle of mind and intelligence. So at this point we are still in a fetal stage.
Right, and the forms of the Petries are the same of their progeny, so they are of an ethereal nature themselves. Ed, sorry, did I say Ed? That
Yeah,
was
yeah.
to answer your question. And then, but they were not complete and were senseless. They were senseless because there was not the physicality or the means for mind to animate these forms yet.
Yeah, in the Theosophical view, there are these three levels of expression: the spirit, then the soul slash mind, and then the body. At this point, we have the Petris forming a body. The spirit or the monad is beginning to kind of take these bodies within its atmosphere and helping them evolve. But there is no soul to make the bridge, to serve as a bridge between the spirit and the body, simply because these are very early stages of evolution.
So once again, we're talking about the first root race. So
Mhm.
this would be what we're talking about here, the astral doubles are the first root race.
Mhm. So if the petris
Right.
are jellyfish, yes, well, probably they have a structure that is more organized because that's what evolution does. Takes matter, which at the beginning is kind of formless, chaotic, and then through evolution, that matter begins to be shaped into a structure, whether physical or astral or mental or whatever it is. So probably the petris have a well-defined, astral structure, but they emanate that model that they have, and little by little nature begins to form the bodies according to the model. So we can think that the model they emanated was the archetype for the kind of physical bodies that we have, which is what Blavatsky said. Last week we read at the end something that said these astral bodies that were emanated by the Petris are the archetypes or the ideal models for the physical bodies of humanity.
Okay, so the third new proposition, that man in this round preceded every mammalian, the anthropoids included, in the animal kingdom. Man is the end towards which all human creation has
Animal.
which all animal creation has tended from the first appearance. Early humanity procreated its like through drops of vital energy oozing out of the body. All this vital energy scattered far and wide from him was used by nature for the production of the first mammal animal forms. So the first part here, man is the end towards which all animal creation has tended from the first appearance. So if we remember in, I believe it was the first one, we talked about the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, and then the Deva kingdom, and in that order. So, so then how does this it looks like it contradicts that is what I'm trying to say, but it doesn't. Is it?
The idea is
Yeah.
that humanity is the macrocosm of the animal creation, which is the microcosm. So all animal creation, Blavatsky says, is always trying to go towards what humanity is, for good and for ill. Animals absorb our habits, good and bad. one could argue that when we see in animals activities like suicide and things like that, it may be just the influence that our psyche has on the animal kingdom. In a similar way, we unconsciously are following our macrocosm that are the celestial beings. So as we awake to our spiritual life, we are actually trying to become these angelic beings in a sense. So each kingdom is like the model that the lower kingdom is trying to follow.
So at one time on Earth, there was minerals, plants, and lower animals. Then the human or man came, and from man, we see here, procreated its like through drops of vital energy oozing out of the body. These are in the Secret Doctrine what are called the sweat-born here. So this is the second root race. And the first root race we could think of were the pudding sacks. I don't think that's the right word, is it?
Yeah, pudding bags.
Bags? Pudding bags.
She says, but sometimes I think she uses sacks.
Okay.
Also.
So, and then the second root race are the sweat-born because of this prana. They were born of the prana from this humanity that was already created.
Yeah, so the second root race, this is, remember, it's just a very brief summary, but the second root race, was still ethereal, more concrete than the first one, closer to physicality. Physicality begins with the third root race. So the reproduction was like, imagine an aura, and there were like these drops of vitality and auric matter that came out of the bodies, and that would serve as a new body for another monad. But also there was a profusion of all these things that were emanated from the bodies of humanity. So what Blavatsky says, as we are going to see, is that the astral form of the animals began to use these emanations from humanity for them to become more concrete themselves. So let's see the next.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I want to explain too, when Madame Blavatsky talks about humanity, she's not talking about us, humanity, as we see it. She's talking about the pudding bags of the first root race, the sweat-born of the second root race. So that's the lower nature before mind comes in and animates these forms.
Yeah, this is more like human forms than
Right.
humanity in a sense.
And then I would say yes, the Dhyani Chohans or the Dhyani
Yeah.
Buddhas, right?
Yeah, Dhyani Buddhas are a kind
Sorry.
of there. So Dhyan Chohan or Dhyani Chohan is a general term, like saying celestial beings.
Right.
And within that, there are different kinds of celestial beings. The lunar Pitris are a kind of celestial beings. The Dhyani Buddhas are another kind. There are different kinds.
Right. The Pitris is the progenitors of mankind. The Pitris, the progenitors of mankind. Yes.
So these lunar Pitris, because this is what we talked about last week. If in the laboratory you want to generate artificially with cells, out of cells, you want to create an organ, you need to give it a matrix on which the cells will grow. So you need to guide them into generating a structure. Otherwise, if you put a cell on a petri dish, the cells will grow as a sheet.
They've reproduced. I think it was liver cells.
But
they
others.
came in. Other cells. But it came out on a flat sheet. One cell high layer, which wasn't useful. So what really is kind of important here is to know that this astral body or this etheric is the mold from which our physical nature comes from.
Mm-hmm. So what Blavatsky is postulating is that all that we, in the uterus, we see that it is on a wall, on a flat wall of the uterus, and then there is a single cell there, and then it starts reproducing, but then it starts bending and acquiring, forms and all this. And in science, there is no explanation why in the uterus it does that, and then in the lab it cannot do that. You need to provide a matrix. So the idea in Theosophy is that because in the uterus you have the etheric body that is guiding, the cells are folding around, so to say, the etheric body. So this is what the Petries did at the very beginning when there were no human forms. How did the first human forms come from or appear? Well, it was the Petries that emanated this model and guided little by little the evolution of a physical body.
Yes, and Ed's right. If you have a vine and you're trying to grow, a vine will just grow flat unless it has something to wind itself on.
Yeah, so the lunar Petries are the progenitors of the physical body of humanity.
From plants to creatures which preceded the first mammalians, all have been consolidated in their physical structure by means of the cast-off dust of those minerals and the refuse of the human matter, whether from living or dead bodies on which they fed or which gave them their outer bodies. In his turn, man grew more physical by reabsorbing into his system that which he had given out. When I read this, I thought of those green arrows of recycle, reduce, recycle, and reuse, and that's what's going on here. It's humanity's being built out of its recycled material.
Mm-hmm. Remember that in this view, humanity and all the kingdoms of nature start by being ethereal, and then they all begin to be physical. Now, Blavatsky explains that the plants, the minerals become physical first, and we can see that on Earth. Then, but there are plants there. When there are only minerals on Earth, there are also plants, but the plants are still not physical. They are ethereal. So by absorbing the emanations of the minerals, the cast-off dust, Blavatsky says, and remember this is all allegorical language. There are no words to explain this.
Right, if you're trying to picture a daisy being formed out of rock dust, that kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, so this is allegorical language, but somehow from the mineral kingdom, the plants began to use that to become more and more physical. And then lower animals also, from the plants, they began to be more physical. Then the idea is that human beings began to be physical before other mammalians were physical. And Blavatsky quotes in the Genesis that you have two stories. In the story, I think, the second story, Adam is created first, and then God brings the different animals for Adam to give them a name. So in that story, the animals come after Adam. And Blavatsky says that is the story of humanity in the fourth round. In the previous rounds, which are more preparatory, animals are first and then humans come. But in the fourth round, humans were the first to be more or less physical. And from the emanations of human, the higher animals, the mammals, began to be physical also. And then there was this recycling of matter that made them more and more concrete, and they influenced each other.
It says protoplants.
Yeah, something like that. And before we go on, because Blavatsky then doesn't talk about the last step in these propositions, is that once humanity gets to a point where the physical body is built, then it's time for the mind to begin to express through the body. This is in the middle of the third root race. More or less in the middle of the third root race, humanity becomes physical enough so that souls begin to incarnate in the bodies. And with the incarnation of the soul, which is the source of mind, understanding, the sense of I am, then a more complete humanity appears on the globe. At this stage, so the lunar Petries completed their work when they produced, because they are the forces behind evolution up to this point, So with their influence, they produce this physical body, and then the job of the lunar Petris is over. And then there are other Petris that come to help in the awakening of the mind in humanity, which are called sometimes the solar Petris. So Blavatsky doesn't mention them here in the summary, but that is a big part of the evolution of humanity.
So the solar Petries are part of these demiurgos, the celestial bodies, the Dion Chohans. So they're just one of the hierarchies in the, in the building of humanity. So if we think of anything that's built, you have the masons or the workers that come in and build the structure. Then you have the next comes in to build, the infrastructure in there. And then eventually the solar Petries come in and put in the internet service.
So Bob is asking
so what happens to Darwinism in all of this?
Yes, H.P.B. said that Darwin was tolerably right, let's say, but that he caught the process in the second half of the process.
He caught it?
Yeah,
he started the second half.
Well, he caught the laws operating in the second he discovered, in the second part of the process. The laws that he discovered can operate only on physical animals or humanity. So Blavatsky says once the physical structure of humanity and animals and plants is established, then all these other laws of natural selection, etc., they start operating. Now what Blavatsky says is that natural selection per se can never create new species, and this is where Blavatsky would say that's where Darwin's view is wrong. Natural selection can only select which species are better for this environment. But she would always say that the diversity of species come from consciousness and from the celestial beings. They are the ones that are pushing for new expressions that are more appropriate to express consciousness in a better way. And then natural selection, what it does is to see, okay, this body may be perfect for consciousness, but can the body survive? So there is this interplay between the physical and the intellectual evolution, and natural selection, that's the plane on which natural selection acts. You could say that Darwin is a fifth round theory. Yes, or the middle of the fourth, physical structures began in the middle of the fourth round. We are in the fourth round of evolution. So that's, I think, what H.P.B. says, there were 3.5 rounds where nature was becoming physical. And then from the middle of the fourth up, we have the natural selection and all that. So yes, Darwin would be a 4.5 round theory. So now we go to the conclusions, and Ianthe Hoskins has a little note.
In the Bowen notes, Madame Blavatsky suggests that an initial study program should include the conclusion in Volume 2. The passages that follow are selected from that part of the work. Enough was said to show the evolution in general events, mankind, and everything else in nature proceeds in cycles. We have spoken of 7 root races, 5 of which have nearly completed their earthly career and have claimed that every root race, with its subraces and innumerable family divisions and tribes, was entirely distinct from its preceding and succeeding root race. I'm going to stop here.
Okay.
So here, Madame Blavatsky tells us that there are 7 root races and 7 subraces in each root race. So we are in the 5th root race right now, in the 5th subrace, and that there will be 2 more subraces before we get to the next root race, number 6 and number 7. And what we have to do again is remember that in root race 1, the pudding bags, root race 2, the sweat-born, root race 3, which we can say are the Lemurians, which were very large, and then root race 4 were the Atlanteans, and then root race 5 we have us. And if we look at that or think about that, how different are the body, just the physical structure of each of those evolutionary stages of humanity were, then we have to carry that forward, that root race 6 and root race 7 will not be us in just like super form.
Yeah, they will be quite different in some ways that we don't know. But basically what we will see is that Blavatsky proposes, this is why when we talk about root races, we are really talking about different evolutionary stages, not just ethnicities. It's not just people with different heights or skin colors or this or that. The root races are huge evolutionary cycles, and they are quite different one from the other. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that in the Theosophical view, there is a finite number of souls incarnating. So the souls that were incarnating in the third root race, because the first and the second souls did not incarnate yet there, but the souls in the third root race and then in the fourth root race are the same souls that are now incarnating in the fifth, and then will be the same souls incarnating in the sixth. So these are the evolutionary stage of one single humanity. So if we talk about the fourth root race, it is our past. If we talk about the sixth root race, it is our future.
But not me.
Our soul's future, not the personality, of course.
So the human races are born one from the other, grow, develop, become old, and die. Their subraces and nations follow the same rule, and that's what you were just saying.
Yeah.
And then I just want to touch on here, because this was one of my questions I always wanted to know. So the first, the second, and the third root race, we can see, or I should preface by saying each root race works on a particular aspect of human nature. Of human nature. So the first, the second, and third, we saw the ethereal, we saw the prana or the vital energy, and we saw the physicalness. So the fourth root race was the emotions worked on, or that was more prominent, we could say. Did I say that right? Yeah. The fifth is the mind. So we can see now that how our mind is being used more for more than just living day to day.
Yeah, the mind is dominant in this evolutionary cycle. And then the next one.
The next one will be the spiritual intuition. And then, of course, I wanted to know the seventh, and I couldn't find it anywhere. But the seventh would be, if we go by principles, would be the Atmic principle. And so she really doesn't say anything about what that will look like.
Yeah, the masters didn't want to talk about the seventh root race. They did talk about the next one, the sixth, because it's close, as we are going to see. But yes, the idea is that with each root race we develop or work on a particular principle, whether the physical bundle or emotional, mental, or the spiritual intuition. Now, what happened to the other souls? I'm not really sure what other souls. There are many souls, and only a little portion of this huge group of souls is incarnated at any moment in humanity. So when somebody's, bodies die, the souls go back to the inner planes, and a different group of souls incarnate, and they alternate like this. We spend most of our time on the inner planes, but there are no souls left behind, to quote that. There is a group of souls that have been evolving through all these root races and will do so until the end of evolution.
We have to remember that our physical life here in this physical form is very minute compared to the amount of time that we spend on the inner planes. Mm-hmm. So there's this natural shifting of souls.
Yeah, and the growth in population is easily explained with the shortening of the time that is spent on the inner planes. So normally Theosophy says about 1,000 years, 2,000 years, depending on the more spiritual the soul, the more time it spends on the inner planes in general. There are exceptions for everything. But when the time becomes more and more materialistic, the souls begin to incarnate faster because they are attracted to the physical plane, and those are the times where population grows. But that's a completely different subject. We cannot go into. Yes.
Nevertheless, our general proposition will not be accepted. It is formally denied by most naturalists that mixed human races, that is, the seeds for entirely new races, are any longer formed in our days. It will be said that whatever forms man has passed through in the long prehistoric past, there are no more changes for him in the future. Hence, that our sixth and seventh root races are fictions. Meanwhile, such is the prophecy of the secret books, and there are no uncertain statements. So here we can see the arrogance of man, science. Back in the 1800s, it was thought that they had found everything that could be found out about science, and there was nothing more. Well, we can see in those 200, 150 years how much has changed since then. The same thing here. They think that now we are the pinnacle, our humanity is the pinnacle of humanities, and there's nothing more to be gained from it.
Yeah.
So, the Secret Doctrine, the Mahatma's H.P.B. tells us that there is so much more that can be gained, or that there is in the future.
Now see that there is another interesting point here that we will see again a little later, that Blavatsky talks about the idea of, let's see, the mixed human races. As we are going to see in the Theosophical view, the evolution of the different root races happened by mixing different ethnicities. The idea of going back to the purity of any particular ethnicity is actually going against evolution. In the Theosophical view, what evolution wants is to mix different elements, because out of the mixture of different elements, you bring out a new type which can express new things. So sometimes, people say or think that some ideas, racist ideas, may have come from misunderstanding of the Theosophical teachings. I really don't think that is the case, basically because all the racist view of humanity was prevalent in Europe in the 19th century and was accepted by everybody. Nobody needed to come and look at the idea of races in the Secret Doctrine, and most people didn't read the Secret Doctrine. But also because if you see the model that the Secret Doctrine proposes, is the opposite to most of the ideas in racist people. So we will see that the idea of a pure race is actually the opposite to what Theosophy says evolution implies. We will see a little later again.
And if we can just take a look at or remember in just regular humanity that 200 years ago, how or longer than that, how separated or isolated different populations were. And the only way there was ever any mixture was through war or conquests. And so then what happened with the United States, and we'll see, with the United States, North America, we'll see is this mixture, this melting pot that it's even called today. Mm-hmm. Since the beginning of the Atlantean, the fourth root race, many millions years have passed. Yet we find the last of the Atlanteans still mixed up with the Aryan, the fifth root race, 11,000 years ago. This shows the enormous overlapping of one race over the race which succeeds it. Though in characters and external type, the elder losses its characteristics, loses its characteristics, and assumes the new feature of the younger race. So even though when you talk about the Atlanteans, you're talking about these Amazon women, these very, very tall, very thick-skinned people,
Yeah.
humanity, yeah.
The giants.
Right, the giants, cyclops, those types of things.
Yeah,
There's stories like that everywhere. So this is coming from the Atlantean race. Well, although that the fifth root race started in that time of the fourth root race, now we even have some remnants of the fourth root race here, but they're not looking like the Atlantean race did. They look just like the rest of us.
Yeah. So, this is one of the reasons why you find in most mythologies these wars between giants and the humanity. That was the during the time of the overlapping, which will happen also with the new root race, as we are going to see. There will be a long time of overlap where two different humanities are living together. Then let me say a little about this, the idea, the fifth root race that was called Aryan. That is how the scholars used to call the Indo-European races. This was the scientific name. That then when the Nazis took that and used it in the way they did, the scholars changed the name and now they call it Indo-European. So Blavatsky was just using the name that the scholars were using at the time. And that is the humanity at this point. You see the European culture for many centuries was the culture that was, at the head of the technological and science and philosophy, all this aspect of humanity that has to do with the fifth root race, with the development of the mind and all of this. And the idea is that the whole of humanity is fifth root race, but in particular the European culture. And remember that our souls are born one incarnation in Europe, let's say, next incarnation in Africa, next incarnation in South America or in Australia. There is no order for the incarnations. We incarnate in different environments to develop different aspects of humanity. So when we talk about the European culture or the American culture or the African culture, we are talking like different subjects within a school. They are all the same grade, but they are different subjects. So the European culture was the one that from which modern philosophy, etc., came, and modern science, etc., came from, and that is the culture that typifies the fifth root race. Now there will be a sixth root race that we are going to see, and the culture typifying that will be formed in other parts of the world. Again, that doesn't mean we will be still born in either in that part of the world or in any other parts of the world. These are all, as I was saying, different subjects.
Right. I was thinking when we start thinking of the bigger ones, the root races, that division is a little harder to close in. But if we think about each root race has 7 sub-races within it that are working on those same particular aspects. So right now we're in the 5th root race of the 5th sub-race. So we're kind of in the mind of the mind. Mm-hmm. But within the 5th root race, it's very easy to extrapolate that there are 5.1 people, 5.2 people, 5.3.
By 0.2 or we mean the second subrace, the third subrace.
So 5.4 subrace, 5.5. And there even are the beginnings of the 6th subrace, so the 5.6ers, I guess you could call them. So then we can see that at any point in time, and a root race lasts millions of years, at any point in time we can be a 5.1 or a 5.2 or a 5.3.
Yeah, and also you can be born in the 5th subrace, and then the next one you are born in the first sub-race of the same
Right, so it
root
doesn't
race.
go in order. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, for example, Blavatsky said that the first sub-race of the fifth root race was in the Indian sub-race, and she says because
India.
yeah, and she says normally the first sub-race in a root race keeps like the spiritual overtone of the development of the race. So even though humanity has developed four more sub-races after the Indian sub-race, that doesn't mean that the Indian sub-race is less evolved than the fifth one. On the contrary, as I was saying, Blavatsky says because of it was the first one, it keeps the spiritual, keynote of humanity. But obviously the fifth sub-race, which is the European, it's more focused if a soul wants to learn more about, I don't know, technology and things like that. It will be born, and now there is globalization, so
Right.
all of this doesn't work any longer in that sense. But let us take it as as a simplified model. A soul would be born in Europe, let's say, 400 years ago or 200 years ago when science started. But if the soul wanted to have a more spiritual life, it would be born in some other place, or a more family life, it will be born in another sub-race. So we have to understand it in that way, not a way that one is better than the other.
Right, in your example of the classes, if we look at any grade in school, we don't skip a class. We don't not go to math in fourth grade or not go to science in fifth grade. We hit all of those classes. So
even within fourth grade.
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah, with
different-
fourth grade, we hit all those subjects, all those different subjects. In fifth grade, we hit all those different subjects. So the same thing here. In the fourth root race, we hit all those sub-races. In the fifth root race, we're going to hit all those sub-races within there.
Yes, and each root race develops new senses. Like the Atlanteans
Right.
are said to have 4 senses. We have 5 senses.
And then the sixth will have 6 senses. Now, occult philosophy teaches that even now, under our very eyes, the new race and races are preparing to be formed, and that is in America, that the transformation will take place and has already silently commenced.
Let's read the next one
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
and then we talk.
Pure Anglo-Saxons hardly 300 years ago, the Americans of the United States have already become a nation apart, and owing to a strong admixture of various nationalities and intermarriage, almost a race of its own or within itself, not only mentally but also physically. They are, in short, the germs of the sixth subrace of the fifth root race.
So that would be 5.6.
And in some few hundred years more will become most decidedly the pioneers of that race which must succeed to the present European or fifth subrace in all its new characteristics.
So later Theosophists also said that New Zealand and Australia were also places where the sixth subrace was going to be formed, because eventually there will be a shift of continents, and all the Pacific Ocean between the west coast of the US and the east coast of Australia and New Zealand, all that will come up and be the new continent, and then the other parts of the world will be submerged.
So basically the Pacific Ocean area
Will be the new
will be the
continent.
new continent. So it's more of an up and down motion than a a continental drift
Yeah.
ideal.
So you see here again that what Blavatsky says is that because of the admixture of various nationalities and intermarriage, is that a new subrace can be formed. So again, this goes against the idea of returning back to a pure race. That is actually going against evolution. And as we are going to see again, this sixth subrace, once it is established, it will spread in different parts of the world. And souls will be born sometimes in the sixth subrace, and then in the second, and then in the fifth, as we are
All
saying.
on that one continent.
Well, no, but we are talking first about
Oh,
the
the
fifth.
subrace, sorry.
Yeah, this is a little confusing. We are
Yeah.
talking about 5.6. Remember, there are 7 subraces within a root race. So we are now in 5.5. What Blavatsky is saying here right now is 5.6. We are still in the same root race, but it's a new subrace. No change of continents or anything yet. Yes. And then there will be the 7th subrace that Blavatsky says will begin in South America, but then again it will spread as all the other subraces spread. And when the 5.7 is fully developed, then the new root race will start, the 6th root race, and that's where the continental shift will happen that we were talking about. So what? No.
I was going to answer Deborah. So Deborah said, seems she is seeing the melting pot of North America. Yes, that's true. And with every new race, new faculties are acquired. And yes, that's true too.
Yeah, with every new race, with the sub-race, the idea is that for the sub-race is not a new race, remember, but there is the beginning of what will be the next root race, the seeds. So the idea is that when we were in the 4th root race, the 5th root race there was the seed for the 5th root race.
The 5th. So 4.5 was the seed for the 5th root race.
Yeah. So now for 5.6, the next subrace will be the seed for the next root race. And the next root race will be different physically, will have one more sense, etc., as we said. Not so much the next subrace, but the next subrace will start developing some qualities that will be fully developed in the next root race.
After this, in about 25,000 years, they will launch into preparations for the 7th subrace, until, in consequence of cataclysms, the first series of those which must one day destroy Europe, and still later the whole Aryan race, and thus affect both Americas, as also most of the lands directly connected with the confines of our continent and isles. The 6th root race will have appeared on the stage of our round.
So you see, Blavatsky gives more or less 25,000 years for each subrace. So she says that the 6th subrace of our root race is about to begin, it's beginning, and it will start being more obvious in a few hundred years. Then after 25,000 years, the 7th subrace, we were saying that it is said it would be in South America. And then after that, so after 50,000 years, more or less, will come the change or the new root race. So it's a long way in the future. And this is why Blavatsky says does affect both Americas. The idea is that the American continent, the European continent is the base continent for the 5th root race. And the American continent will be the basis for the 6th root race, along with
the South American continent.
No, the whole American.
The whole of it is what you're saying.
The 2 Americas. Yeah, when I say American, I'm talking about the 3 Americas, along with Australia and New Zealand and all the land that comes in between. That will be the continent for the 6th root race. But this is, at least 50,000 years in the future.
And we can see here those contradictory powers in play, the power of destruction and the power of creation. You start talking about cataclysms and volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis and floods, and we start getting a little nervous because it affects, how we live today. But these things are always going on, and what comes of it is an evolutionary stage, the next evolutionary stage.
Yeah, and always remember that we are looking at this, the esoteric philosophy looks at the soul, not the bodies. So, for example, we in particular may be living in the US in this incarnation. Well, next incarnation we will be born anywhere else. When the new root race appears, we may be anywhere else in the world, wherever. It doesn't really matter. When Europe goes down, we may be living in Europe at the time, but the bodies are not really important. The soul may have lived in many different places. So always try to fight the tendency to identify or to look at things from your particular body in the particular gender that is born in this life, in the particular country or culture, because we are constantly rotating. We are not Americans or South Americans or Australians. We are a soul incarnated in different parts for a little
That
brief
costume.
time.
Yeah, we're in that costume of that time.
Yeah.
It will silently come into existence, so silently indeed that for long millenniums shall its pioneers, the peculiar children who will grow into peculiar men and women, be regarded as abnormal oddities, physically and mentally. Then, as they increase and their numbers become with every age greater, one day they will awake to find themselves in a majority. We can see this happening in cycles time and time again. Something new comes up, and this new thing, they're persecuted, or the new ideas are persecuted, and people even die for it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this is all like it's always been. And the same
And
thing.
eventually that idea or that new thing is absorbed by the majority.
Right, right. So the same thing happens with here. These, when we're talking about the sixth root race, when the seed is during the sixth subrate, so during 5.6, there may be some changes. There may be some physical changes or mental changes, and those will be looked at oddities. But if we remember, we won't remember then, but if we remember that these oddities that come up are really evolutionary advances.
Yes, like for example, Blavatsky suggests in some places that the sixth root race will be androgynous, that there won't be a separation of sexes any longer. Again, this is way, in the future. But I mentioned in another webinar, I read a couple of articles where, at least here in the US, I don't know in other parts of the world, but they are seeing an increase in children that are being born with both genders, like hermaphrodites. And there is now a movement of parents, because before the doctors would just choose what gender the baby was going to be and just operate it, surgically remove the other. Now there is a group of parents that are creating a movement to let the kids have both genders and then decide when they are teenagers, what gender they. But besides that, it's interesting to see that that seems to be happening. And as Blavatsky says here, right now is something completely abnormal. But way in the future, most people will start being born like that, and then a new kind of body will be, developed, and that will be the norm in the whole of humanity.
If we look at it in a U-shaped paradigm, if we look at the first root race and its qualities, and the second root race, which was androgynous, and then we have the third, the fourth is at the bottom. The fifth race comes up here. If we come and look at the sixth root race here, that's parallel on the same lines of the second root race, which was androgynous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, second and beginning of the third.
Mankind will not grow again into giant bodies, as in the case of the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, because while the evolution of the fourth race led the latter down to the very bottom of materiality in its physical development, the present race is on its ascending arc, and the sixth will be rapidly growing out of its bonds of matter and even flesh. So here again she talks about the giant of the Lemurians and the Atlanteans. And it's funny, we think that we have no problem thinking that there were dinosaurs or very large plants or anything like that. But when it comes to very large humans, that kind of doesn't, sit as easy. But we see, like we mentioned just a little bit earlier, that in all stories, in all traditions, there are stories of giants.
Hmm. So, but Blavatsky says that changes in the future, even though, as Michele just was saying, there is a parallelism between the races, are not going, the future races are not going to be so big because now they are on a spiritual ascending arc. So actually, Blavatsky says there will be less and less physical, and perhaps the seventh root race, of which we know nothing, may be again ethereal, may not even be physical any longer.
Right. If we remember that table we saw, one of the other webinars, that showed the levels of materiality versus spirituality. So we can see that as they say here, that the fourth hit the bottom of materialness, and now we're on our way up where we're becoming, we've hit all the physicalness that we could do. Now we're working into spirituality.
Yeah.
And Deborah says, Max Planck said, sometimes science only changes when those with that belief die and the new idea becomes what the new generation knows or is familiar with. I've heard this too, that a lot of people think when they're in a company and they're trying to make changes that they're really, forerunners and they're making changes, but really what happens is the old people with their ideas just pass away or are no longer there, so the new ideas are what's in vogue.
But also science has the problem that they cannot just believe in the giants. They have to find the remains. And most of the remains of the giants are in the old continent that is now at the bottom of the sea. As we said, that there is this shift in continents. So there are reports of a couple of skeletons that were found, giants, but they are kept hidden because there is no way to explain them. I don't know if that is true or not, but there are books written about that. But the Mahatmas, Blavatsky's teachers, say you would find few of them because most of the bones with all the cataclysm and all that are gone and are destroyed. But there are still a few, but they are at the bottom of the ocean. So until science finds something like that, they can't just embrace something without having proofs. That's the strength and the weakness of science.
The fifth will overlap the sixth race for many hundreds of millenniums, changing with it slower than its new successor, still changing in stature, general physique, and mentality, just as the fourth overlapped our Aryan race and the third had overlapped the Atlanteans.
So yeah, this is again the same idea. For a while there will be these two humanities different that seem different, cohabitating, and little by little the older bodies will also take on the qualities of the new bodies.
But not completely different. Not, yeah, okay, never mind.
Yeah. So, the changes are always slow. It's not that all of a sudden the bodies will be, very different. But at some point, just like when there were giants and the regular humanity.
Right, David and Goliath
Yeah.
is what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, so there will be an overlap.
This process of preparation for the sixth great race must last throughout the whole sixth and seventh subraces. But the last remnants of the fifth continent will not disappear until some time after the birth of the new race, when another and new dwelling, the sixth continent, will have appeared above the new waters on the face of the globe, so as to receive the new stranger. So here she's saying that the sixth root race will start off on the land masses that we have here. And what happens is those that are of the sixth seed will move then to areas or habitat areas that are, part of the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand, And then in the long periods that the shift happens, then they'll be there, and then from the spots where they were, then they'll populate this new landmass.
So again, before that happens, the 6 and 7 subraces have to run their course, and then the new continent will come up, and the old continents, there will be the shift. So that is in the future.
So no moving to Mars. Yes, there will be moving to Mars,
But not yet.
Yeah, not in this Manvantara. When shall this be? Who knows, say the great masters of wisdom, perchance, and they are as silent upon the subject as the snow-capped peaks that tower above them. Only as nature no more proceeds by sudden jumps and starts, than man changes suddenly from a child into a mature man. The final cataclysm will be preceded by many smaller submersions and destructions, both by wave and volcanic fires. And I'm underlined silent myself because this was a good practice for me to say the great masters of wisdom, they're silent on this subject. They don't sit around and speculate even, with what's going to happen in the 7th root race. Where are they going to live? What are they going to eat? What are they going to look like? And all those questions run through my head when I tend to read this stuff. So it's a very good touchstone for me to remember that it's more like idle chatter if I start going this way. Yeah, if I start speculating. So better to be silent and just understand this and let it, kind of trickle over, and then, the little insights will come.
Yeah. But anyway, the other point is that all this happens gradually. It's not that all of a sudden, there will be this apocalypse, And the last one, I think this is
Ed says 6th root race, perfected man, 7 root race,
yeah.
gods and training.
Yeah, probably that's the plan.
Humanity is a child of cyclic destiny, and not one of its units can escape its unconscious mission or get rid of the burden of its cooperative work with nature. Thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cycle pilgrimage. Climates will and have already begun to change. Each tropical year, and I put this in 25,000 years, after the other, dropping one subrace, but only to the begat another higher race on the ascending cycle. I put that in there just to remind me that these are really long periods of time.
And that climate change is also part of what happens. This has happened, if you read the Secret Doctrine, many times in the past, and will happen in the future. We don't know if the climate change that we are witnessing right now is being accelerated by our activity, or perhaps not. Perhaps it's just part of the natural progress, or perhaps it's part of the natural progress, but we are accelerating it, and we should not. So, it's good for people to realize that we cannot be polluting our planet independently from climate change. But the change in climate and the movement of the poles, the magnetic poles and all that has happened in the past and will happen in the future according to the Secret Doctrine.
Right.
All right.
What race is the Earth?
It would be the 4th. And I don't want to go too much into that, but it's the 4th chain, so it would be like the 4th.
The exultant pulse will beat high in the heart of the race now in the American zone. But there will be no more Americans when the 6th race commences, for they will have now become a new race and many new nations. Thus it is the mankind of the new world whose mission and karma it is to sow the seeds for a forthcoming, grander, and far more glorious race than any of those we know of at present.
Yeah. So the 6th root race will be more evolved than the 5th, as the 5th was more evolved than the 4th. If we talk at the level of root races, there are clear evolutionary advancements, but then the whole of humanity is part of each of the root races. And as Blavatsky says there, the in all this time, countries come and go, cultures come and go. She's talking about this land, whatever country will be here, in 5,000 years or even more. But the point is that this land will be, as Blavatsky says there, part of the new continent, and there will be different nations at the time here. All right, so that's the end. It was a little longer because we had to cram, the whole anthropogenesis in one class. But we hope that, I don't know, is there any comment or question before we close?
I just want to mention the anthropogenesis from Blavatsky's standpoint is more global. I read Leadbeater and Besant's Man, Whence, How, and Whither, and that does give a little more particulars. What was more specifics. What was nice for me is that it kind of helped me in my daily practice to see what I can do to help build the seeds for the coming of the next sub-race or root race.
Mm-hmm.
Any practical?
That's what Michele
that was
saying.
just it. It's an article, it's a chapter out of there that's called The Coming of the Sixth Root Race, and it was very helpful in that sense to know, where we're coming from. We're coming from mind, and we want to go to spiritual intuition. So our practice, this is a practice of yoga, or a yogic practice of what we do each day that helps build our mind, that moves towards the spiritual intuition and away from, our lower, more animalistic tendencies.
Mm-hmm. Yes, when we see descriptions of the next root race, there are some keywords like, for example, cooperation as opposed to competition. Competition is a quality of the fifth root race. Cooperation is a quality of the next root race. So anything we do to learn to work in cooperation is preparing ourselves and humanity for the next evolutionary stage. Spiritual intuition, as Michele said. Then also tearing down the limitations and the boundaries, what you always say, that houses.
Right. In that book, Besant writes that the houses will no longer have walls. And
because it's a temperate climate, the earth, the climate changes.
It's very tropical, and all those basic needs are met, so we don't have to worry about those types of things.
But just imagine, we value so much our privacy, and that is also part of the fifth root race approach to things. The sixth root race seems to be far more open, communal, because humanity will be, more on the level of cooperation, of intuitively feeling more connected in the sixth root race, in the far future.
We can see now that Annie Besant bought land specifically all over the world for groups or for parts of the Theosophical Society to go there and live in community. And those are great places to be seeds or seedlets of the next subrace. But we can see, even living in any community, even living with your family, how hard it is to do that. So every time that we can, or I think every time that I can kind of keep my mouth closed and keep those thoughts from going to separateness and try to embrace community more, then I'm working towards the goals that Annie Besant was looking at, or that's there.
Yeah.
Yes, Man, Whence, How, and Whither.
All right.
Thank you, Rosie.
Okay, so we hope you enjoy the series and have a little more of an idea of what the Secret Doctrine proposes. Of course, this is all just very general views, but I think it's an interesting picture that Blavatsky is proposing there. And then if you go more in detail, then all these practical applications also and everything begin to become more obvious. Okay. So I see Rosie's typing. Let us wait.
Type faster. Just kidding.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh,
outstanding.
okay.
I think we all get to see. Oh,
Very
yay.
good. Then next time we see you, if you please will explain it to us, you know. All right. So thank you, everybody. It was a
Yes.
pleasure to share with you. Thank you for your support and being here.
Thank you, Mary,
And thank you, yeah, Mary, Stephen, and everybody that made this
behind the
possible.
scenes.
Yes. So, yes, we'll see you in our next At Home with Theosophy series or in any of the webinars that we are doing.